everyone, welcome back to my channel. It has been a little while since I'd last done a video, so apologies for that. Just had a lot on lately, mentally. I mean, I'm stuck at home, but mentally there's been a lot going on, so mental problems, OCD, quite bad, so it's been hard to find time. So I thought I'd do a video today, so I just have a little bit of time now wherever I can do it. I'm still waiting for therapy to help me with my OCD. It's taking a ridiculously long period of time since I had a triage appointment with an OT a number of weeks back. Seems that things have been taking quite a long time. So I'm still waiting, which is very frustrating because I do need therapy quite urgently to help me with my OCD. Still waiting for COVID vaccination because I'm homebound, and that's also stressing me out. I haven't been able to go out at all. I'm only in the garden because I feel particularly vulnerable at the moment until I've had my vaccine. That's taking forever. Just a lot going on mentally. But I've been doing some crafting, bit by bit. And I just thought I'd do a quick video today. Now, in today's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about the dangers in positive stereotypes. I have actually done a YouTube video on this before, some time back, but I wanted to revisit this issue because on Twitter, not that long ago, I came across a post that was linking various neurodevelopmental conditions such as dyspraxia, dyslexia, autism, ADHD, dyscalculia, Tourette's, with various so-called positive traits, which turned out not to actually be inherently related to any other conditions. In other words, they're not actually part of the definition of the conditions. They don't occur anywhere in the criteria for the set conditions, maybe with the exception of, in autism, fine detail thinking, but even there I'm not sure that's actually in the criteria. So I just run through them. So we had dyspraxia. As I say, this was on a Twitter post, by the way, and it was an infographic on a Twitter post. So dyspraxia was linked with empathy, intuition, problem solving, and verbal skills. Now, that's not part of the definition of dyspraxia. Dyspraxia is a motor coordination disability, a developmental coordination disorder. It's to do with the brain struggling to execute motor sequences. The signals between the motor signals are kind of scrambled, so the brain struggles to plan and execute coordinated motor responses, gross or fine, varying from person to person. That's the definition of dyspraxia, developmental coordination disorder. Doesn't make you any more or less empathic than anyone else. Dyspraxics will vary just the same as anyone who isn't dyspraxic in terms of how much empathy they have. Intuition, same thing. Doesn't make you any more intuitive than anyone else. Problem solving, same thing. Doesn't make you any more able to problem solve than anyone else. Verbal skills, same thing. Not all dyspraxics have great verbal abilities. Some do, some don't. It's not part of the definition. The next one was dyslexia, and they are meant to be great problem solvers. Again, that's not part of the definition of dyslexia. Dyslexia is a specific learning difficulty affecting the ability to decode, affecting decoding essentially. So difficulties learning how to read, how to write, that sort of thing. Phonemes, difficulties with phonemes, and again, affects people in different ways. Some have it more severe than others. Problem solving, I expect there's a great deal of variation between different people with dyslexia as to how good they are at problem solving. Visual thinkers, that has a bit more grain of truth in it, in the sense that on average I think I found dyslexic people tend to be a bit more visually oriented, because you know, if they're struggling to learn how to read and write, then they're going to get their information maybe more from like visual means and pictures, and maybe like prioritise that area a bit more. So yes, there might be a tendency on average for dyslexic people to be more visual thinkers than say a non-dyslexic person. I guess it's similar to in autism, autistic people tend to be more visual thinkers on average, speaking very generally because there will be exceptions, than non-autistics, because in autism, unlike in dyslexia, this issue is to do with well, it's actually similar to dyslexia in some ways. It's to do with processing language, and even in highly verbal autistic people like myself, you know, can struggle with, you know, metaphor and things like that. You know, sometimes having pictures along with words can sometimes help to process. So yes, that's a bit more likely, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be any great strengths connected to that. I mean, some dyslexic, some autistic people might get visual thinking abilities might be really pronounced, and they might have strengths connected to that, but that's by no means going to be the case for all. The other one for dyslexia was observant. That might be connected to the visual thinking thing. Maybe there is a slight tendency for dyslexics to be a bit more observant because maybe they're more likely to pay attention to kind of visual stuff. But again, that doesn't mean that there's going to be any great strengths that come out of that necessarily. And I suppose the same could be applied to 3D thinking. So the next one we had obviously autism. Now, one of the strengths mentioned here was memory. This can be a strength, it's true. I'm not going to say it isn't, it is true that, again, speaking very generally, being autistic can sometimes mean that autism comes with a spiky profile. Okay, that's very common. I'm sure there are exceptions. I mean, it's not part of the criteria, but it's very common for autistic people to have a spiky profile. I certainly do, meaning that you are likely to have things you're very good at and then things you're not so good at. And it's common, but by no means universal, for autistic people to have specific memory strengths. In my case, I do have the ability to memorise whole books. It's not something that comes to me without effort. I have to exert effort, but I do have a very good long-term pictorial memory for what I've read. If I reread it and reread it, it does tend to stick in my brain on rote, and that helped me to some extent when I was doing exams, because I could memorise whole books off by heart. So memory can be a specific asset in autism, that's true. But the extent to which it offsets the deficit, however, is variable, and it certainly hasn't offset a deficit for me. Like I said, it did help me in exams, just because I can memorise off by heart. But in terms of like helping me in other areas of my life, or like holistically helping me to achieve my goals, not as much. And I'm certainly no savant, that's very rare. But yes, it is true, as I say, that selective strengths in memory is quite common in autism, but not universal, and it depends on the person. And often the selective strengths in memory tends to be around a person's interest, so you can amass like vast areas of, you can assign to memory like lots of facts and stuff like around your specific interest, which is likely to be highly idiosyncratic for the person. In my case, I have a very, very good memory for words. And also when I was very interested in Kate Winslet, I knew every single detail of her life, and you know, whatever I'm interested in at a particular time, I can know a lot of information. So that's connected to that. So that is true. The next one for autism is fine detail thinking. And again, like with memory, this does tend to be a specific strength for many autistic people, but not all. And fine detail thinking is, like I say, yeah, it's common in autism, because in autism there tends to be problems seeing a whole picture and a need to focus in on, like zoom in on the fine details. This isn't always a positive thing, however. It can sometimes be quite disabling. It depends on the context. I mean, in terms of like special interest, you can get very, very deeply immersed in like very fine details, but it can sometimes be at the expense of the bigger picture. So yeah, whether or not it's a good thing varies, and it is highly context specific. You know, like often in autism they talk about where's Wally, and like an autistic person being able to spot like Wally like really, really quickly. I am not one of those people. That is not my strength. If I'm presented with a where's Wally, I just get overload, because all I can see is just the details of it, that I can't see the Wally. It's just too much information. So that's what I mean. Fine details doesn't always entail a strength. It can for some autistic people, and that's the stereotype, but it doesn't always, and it really does depend on the context. The next one for autism is hyperfocus. Again, this is very common in autism. I definitely have hyperfocus, but again, is it a strength? Not always. It can sometimes get in the way of other tasks, like when you're focusing on something so much that you don't clean, or you don't wash or whatever, because sometimes it can be too overwhelming. And it depends what you're focusing on, like if it's something productive or not. So again, it's not always a strength. So then we move on to ADHD. And one of the strengths, okay, I'm going to actually, before we talk about ADHD, I'm going to move over to video number 2, because this video is probably going to run out on me, which I don't want. So I'm going to move over to video number 2 now to carry on talking about positive stereotypes. So moving over to video number 2 now.